The subway train screamed past without stopping. Amakana pressed her back against the cold tile wall of the platform, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, twice, then settled into a sickly yellow hum that made the shadows dance. Platform 7. The end of the line. The place where the city forgot to install cameras. Ryan Fletcher knew that. She could hear his footsteps now, unhurried and deliberate, echoing through the empty station like a metronome counting down to something terrible. He wasn't running. He never ran. He never had to because somehow, no matter how fast she moved or how carefully she planned, he always caught up. Ama. His voice drifted down the platform, sing-song and gentle, the way you'd call a lost pet. I can see your bag, sweetheart. That purple one I bought you for your birthday. Remember, you said you loved it. She hadn't loved it. She'd accepted it because saying no to Ryan Fletcher 3 years ago had seemed rude. Now she understood that no had never been an option he recognized. The platform stretched ahead of her like a concrete tomb. One exit, one set of stairs. And Ryan stood between her and freedom, backlit by the flickering emergency sign. His silhouette relaxed and patient. Ama's fingers trembled as she gripped the strap of the bag he'd mentioned. Her phone was dead. The station attendant had left 20 minutes ago. The next train wouldn't arrive for another half hour, and by then, her eyes caught movement near the far pillar. Man, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit so perfectly tailored it looked like it had been stitched directly onto his body. He stood utterly still, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a phone to his ear. His face was sharp planes and cold angles, illuminated intermittently by the dying light. Even from 30 feet away, Ama could see his eyes, dark, calculating, and completely devoid of warmth. He looked like he'd stepped out of a funeral, or like he was about to cause one. There you are. Ryan's voice was closer now, maybe 20 feet behind her. Why do you keep making this so difficult? You know I love you. You know we're meant to be together. The man by the pillar lowered his phone. His gaze shifted from the darkness of the tunnel to her face, then past her shoulder to where Ryan approached. Something flickered across his expression. Not concern. Something colder. Recognition of a situation. Ama's body made the decision before her mind could catch up. Ran. Not toward the stairs. Not toward Ryan. Toward the dangerous stranger who looked like he could kill her without breaking a sweat. Junho Kong had been having a perfectly efficient evening until the woman collided with his chest. His hand moved on instinct, reaching for the compact pistol in the shoulder holster beneath his jacket. But then he felt it. The violent trembling in her frame, the desperate grip of her fingers clutching his lapels, the broken whisper against his collar that sounded like a prayer and a plea combined. Please, she gasped, her accent placing her far from home, her terror placing her in immediate danger. Please, just pretend you know me. Junho's eyes lifted from the crown of her braided hair to the man who had stopped 15 feet away. American. Expensive watch, but off-the-rack suit. Confident posture of someone who'd never been told no with any consequence. The kind of man who smiled with his mouth but kept his eyes flat and possessive. Junho had seen 1,000 variations of this man in his 34 years. Weak men who mistook persistence for power. Ama. The man's smile was a wound trying to pass as charm. Who's your friend? The woman, Ama, pressed closer, and Junho felt the wild hammering of her heart against his ribs. She was genuinely terrified. Not performing. Not exaggerating. This wasn't a lover's quarrel or a dramatic misunderstanding. This was a prey animal who'd finally been cornered. Junho Kong had built an empire on reading people in seconds, on calculating risk versus reward, on knowing when to walk away from complications. Every tactical bone in his body screamed that this was not his problem. He had a meeting in 40 minutes with a politician who didn't like to be kept waiting. He had 3 burner phones in his pocket and a briefcase full of documents that could topple a prosecutor's career. He had absolutely no reason to involve himself in a stranger's crisis. His arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her against his side with practiced possessiveness. "She's with me," Junho said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority and the promise of immediate violence. His smile was cold and sharp as surgical steel. "Is there a problem?" The American's expression flickered. Confusion, then anger, then something that looked like calculation. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Amma and I are leaving." Junho's hand moved to the small of Amma's back, his touch gentle despite the lethal edge in his voice. He stared at the man with a kind of focus that had made grown killers reconsider their careers. "We're leaving, and you're going to stay exactly where you are until we're gone." It wasn't a request. Ryan Fletcher's jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked like he might argue, might push forward, might test exactly what kind of man had just claimed his obsession as territory. But there was something in Junho's eyes, something that transcended language or culture or circumstance, that communicated a simple truth. "I am the worst decision you could make tonight." "This isn't over, Amma," Ryan said quietly, his gaze still locked on her. "You know it isn't." Junho's smile widened a fraction, showing teeth. "Yes," he said softly, each word falling like a judge's gavel. "It is." He guided Amma toward the stairs, his body positioned between her and the threat. His movements unhurried despite the adrenaline he could feel radiating from the woman tucked against his side. He didn't look back. Men like him never had to look back. Behind them, Ryan Fletcher stood alone on the platform, watching them disappear into the soul night. And Amma Khanna realized she'd just traded one kind of danger for another, except this danger had chosen to protect her instead of possess her. She just didn't know yet what that protection would cost. The elevator didn't have buttons for the top 3 floors. Amma noticed this as Junho pressed his thumb against a biometric scanner that glowed blue in the dim interior. The doors closed with a whisper of expensive engineering, and the ascent was so smooth she barely felt it. She could only track their climb by watching the floor numbers light up in sequence. 42, 43, 44. Then nothing until the soft chime announced their arrival at 47. The penthouse doors opened onto a space that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood that true power didn't need to announce itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Seoul like a kingdom laid out for inspection. The furniture was minimal, modern, and positioned with tactical precision. Nothing blocked sightlines to the doors. Security monitors glowed discreetly on one wall, cycling through camera feeds of the building's entrance, garage, and every hallway. "Bedroom is through there." Junho gestured to a hallway without looking at her, already moving toward a desk where 3 phones sat in a precise row. "Bathroom has everything you need. Door locks from the inside." Amma stood frozen in the entryway, still clutching her purple bag. The apartment was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. This wasn't the home of a good Samaritan. This was a fortress. Command center. "What do you do?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Junho's fingers paused over one of the phones. He turned slowly, and in the dim light from the city below, his expression was unreadable. "Things that keep men like your friend away permanently." It wasn't an answer. It was a warning and a promise wrapped together. Amma should have been terrified. She should have run back to the elevator, back to the university dorms, back to anywhere that wasn't the penthouse of a man who carried a gun and spoke about making people disappear as casually as discussing the weather. But when she walked to the bedroom and heard the lock click into place, a heavy mechanical sound that meant something here, something real, she felt her knees buckle with a relief so intense it was almost painful. For the first time in 3 years, Ryan Fletcher was on the other side of a door he couldn't reach. Amma pressed her forehead against the cool wood and finally let herself cry. Amma woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee she hadn't made. Junho stood in the kitchen, speaking rapid Korean into one of his phones. He'd changed into a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and he looked less like a nighttime savior and more like exactly what he was, a man who commanded empires before most people finished their morning coffee. He ended the call as she emerged. "Your passport," he said, sliding a familiar burgundy booklet across the marble counter. "And your student visa documents. My people retrieved them an hour ago." Amma's hand trembled as she picked it up. "From where?" "Your friend's apartment." Junho poured coffee into a second cup without asking if she wanted any. "He had them in a safe, along with copies of your class schedule, your dorm key, and approximately 400 photographs." The coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. Ryan had stolen her passport 6 months ago, claimed he'd found it and would return it soon. She'd been trapped in Seoul ever since, unable to visit her family, unable to leave even if she'd wanted to. "There's more." Junho opened a laptop and turned it toward her. He pulled up search results for her name, or rather the absence of them. Her university profile was gone. Her social media scrubbed. Every digital footprint that Ryan had used to track her movements, deleted. As of this morning, Amma Kana doesn't exist online. Your academic records are secure and encrypted. Your professors have been informed you're taking a medical leave. You can't just... Amma started, then stopped. Course he could. Men who lived in fortresses with biometric elevators could do whatever they wanted. "He was watching you through your own life," Junho said quietly. "Now there's nothing to watch." Amma looked down at her passport, at the proof of her own identity held hostage for half a year, and felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time since Ryan Fletcher had decided she belonged to him, Amma Kana existed on her own terms. The note arrived in a cream-colored envelope, hand-delivered to the university's main office with Amma's name written in Ryan's careful script. Junho's man brought it to the penthouse in a sealed evidence bag, and even through the plastic, Amma could see the familiar handwriting that used to leave love notes on her dorm door. Back when she'd thought they were romantic instead of surveilling. "Don't touch it," Junho said, pulling on latex gloves before sliding the paper out. His expression didn't change as he read, but something in his stillness made Amma's stomach turn to ice. "What does it say?" He turned the note toward her. The message was brief, typed this time, not handwritten. "New locks won't help. New friends won't save you. I know where your mother works in Monrovia. I know your sister takes the 4 p.m. bus from school. You can't hide from someone who loves you this much." The room tilted. Amma grabbed the counter to steady herself. "He can't, my family is." "Not anymore." Junho was already dialing, his voice dropping into that lethal calm that somehow terrified her more than anger. He spoke in Korean, quick and precise, then switched to English. "I need a security detail in Monrovia. 2 targets, family of a client. Immediate deployment." He ended the call and studied the note again, his jaw tight. This wasn't written by a lovesick fool. The delivery timing, the threat escalation, the international reach. Your Ryan Fletcher has resources. Training, possibly. "He works in tech," Amma whispered. "Software development." "No." Junho's eyes met hers, and she saw something new there. Not just protection, but calculation. The look of a hunter recognizing another predator in his territory. Men in tech don't coordinate international surveillance. They don't breach secure facilities to leave notes. They don't think 3 moves ahead like this. He set the paper down carefully. "Your stalker is a professional, Amma, which means amateur solutions won't work anymore." The unspoken ending hung in the air between them. "This requires a professional response." Amma found the ingredients at a West African market in Itaewon, paid for by one of Junho's drivers who waited patiently while she selected the right peppers, the proper rice, the cassava leaves that reminded her of home. She cooked that evening while Junho worked at his desk, the penthouse filling with a smell of palm oil and Scotch bonnet peppers, tomatoes and onions simmering into something that transcended simple food. It was memory made tangible. It was the opposite of fear. "What is that?" Junho appeared in the kitchen doorway. His usual mask of control cracked by something that looked almost like nostalgia. Jollof rice, cassava leaf stew, fried plantains. Amma stirred the pot, not looking at him. "I needed to make something that wasn't about running." He moved closer, watching her hands work with the practiced rhythm of someone who'd learned to cook at her grandmother's side. "My mother used to make something similar. Different spices, but the same feeling." It was the first personal thing he'd ever shared. Amma plated the food and they ate at the counter in silence, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Not tense, not transactional. "She left my father when I was 7, Junho said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. He was Kong Syndicate. She was a translator he'd married for convenience. When she tried to take me and disappear, he found her within 6 hours. He set down his fork. She never tried again. Lived in that house like a beautiful prisoner until she died." Amma's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I rebuilt the syndicate after he died. Made it more efficient, more ruthless." Junho looked at her then, really looked at her, and his eyes held decades of frozen grief. "But when I saw you on that platform, desperate enough to trust a stranger over a man you knew, saw her, making the same calculation she never got to make." "So you're saving her," Amma whispered. "Through me." "No." His hand covered hers on the counter. "I'm choosing differently than he did." "No." Amma crossed her arms, standing her ground in front of Junho's desk. "It's my final exhibition. 3 years of work. I'm not missing it because Ryan Fletcher stole enough of my life already. He threatened your family 4 days ago." Junho didn't look up from his laptop. "You think he won't be watching the one public event you're required to attend? Then come with me." She heard the edge in her own voice, the anger that had been building beneath the gratitude. "Bring your security, bring your guns, bring whatever you need. But I am not hiding anymore." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or respect. He closed the laptop slowly. 6 men minimum. Perimeter surveillance. "You don't leave my sight." The exhibition hall felt different with bodyguards stationed at every exit. Amma watched her classmates glance nervously at the men in dark suits, watched her professor raise an eyebrow at Junho standing 10 feet behind her like a well-dressed shadow. Her thesis piece, a mixed media installation about displacement and home, suddenly felt too vulnerable, too exposed. She'd created it in her dorm, in libraries, in stolen hours when Ryan wasn't monitoring her. Now it hung under gallery lights with armed guards watching the doors. "This isn't protection," she hissed when Junho stepped closer as a group of students approached. "This is a different kind of cage." His jaw tightened. "A cage keeps you alive. A cage keeps me his." Amma turned to face him fully, her voice low but fierce. "Ryan controlled where I went, who I saw, how I lived. You're doing the same thing with better intentions. I'm keeping you breathing. I want to do more than breathe." She gestured at her artwork, at the space she'd fought to occupy. "I want to exist. There's a difference." Junho stared at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, the realization that protection without agency was just another kind of possession. "Then exist," he said quietly, stepping back. "I'll watch the doors." They returned to the penthouse after midnight, the exhibition a success marred only by the tension thrumming between them. Amma kicked off her heels and walked to the windows, Seoul glittering below like scattered diamonds. You were right, Junho said behind her. At the gallery. I was controlling you. She turned, surprised by the admission. He stood in the middle of the living room, still in his suit but with his tie loosened, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. My father controlled my mother by force. I told myself I was different because I used protection instead of violence. His voice was rough, honest. But control is control, regardless of the wrapping. You kept me alive, Amma said softly. I kept you in a gilded cage. He moved closer, stopping just outside her personal space. Close enough to touch, but deliberately not touching. I don't want to be another man who takes your choices away. The city lights painted half his face in shadow, half in gold. Amma saw the conflict there. The war between the man trained to command and the man trying to be better than his bloodline. What do you want? She asked. Junho's eyes dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. To kiss you. I've wanted to since the subway platform, when you trusted me enough to run toward danger instead of away from it. His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek but not making contact. But I need you to want it too. I need you to say yes. The difference crashed over her like a wave. Ryan had stolen kisses, stolen touches, stolen moments and called it love. Junho stood close enough that she could feel his warmth, but he waited. Yes. Yes, Amma whispered and rose on her toes to close the distance herself. His kiss was gentle and fierce and tasted like redemption, hers and his both. The council met in a private room at a restaurant Junho owned. 5 men in expensive suits who'd built their fortunes on blood and silence. Amma wasn't supposed to know about the meeting, but she'd learned to read the tension in Junho's shoulders, the way his jaw set when trouble was coming. He returned to the penthouse at 3 in the morning with split knuckles and murder in his eyes. They want you gone. He poured whiskey with hands that didn't quite steady. The council. They say you're a distraction. A liability, that I'm wasting resources on a civilian when there are territorial disputes that need my attention. Amma's blood went cold. Gone as in, dead, disappeared. However, it needs to happen. Junho drained the glass in one swallow. They gave me 48 hours to handle the situation, or they'll vote me out and handle it themselves. The room tilted. This was the cost she'd always known was coming, the price of safety in a world built on violence. Then I'll leave, she said, already calculating routes to the airport, ways to disappear that didn't involve his protection. I'll go back to Liberia, No. Junho crossed the room and cupped her face in his damaged hands. I told them to vote. Told them if they want war over you, they can have it. You'll lose everything. The syndicate, the business, your entire. I watched my father choose power over my mother every single day until it killed her. His thumb traced her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. I'm not him. I won't be him. Junho. They want a war. His smile was sharp and cold and promised bloodshed. I built this empire once. I'll burn it down and build something new if that's what it takes to keep you breathing. Outside, Seoul glittered in the darkness, unaware that a mafia war had just begun over a girl who'd once whispered a desperate plea on a subway platform. The text came from Amma's mother's number. Platform 7. Midnight. Come alone or I send pictures of your sister to every dark corner of the internet. Amma stared at the message, ice flooding her veins. Ryan had her mother's phone. Had been in her family's home, close enough to touch the people she loved most. She didn't tell Junho. Couldn't risk him starting a war on 2 fronts when the council was already fracturing his empire. She slipped out during his call with his lawyer, took the stairs instead of the elevator, and disappeared into Seoul's night. Platform 7 looked exactly as it had 3 weeks ago. Flickering lights, empty tile, the mechanical scream of trains that didn't stop. Ryan stood at the far end, smiling that terrible smile that had once seemed charming. There you are. He opened his arms like welcoming home a wayward pet. I knew you'd come. You always do what you're told when the people you love are at stake. Let my family go. Amma's voice didn't shake. Wouldn't shake. Not anymore. After you come home with me. After you apologize for running. After you. She's not going anywhere. Junho emerged from the stairwell like vengeance in a tailored suit, 3 of his men flanking him. But he gestured them back, understanding with a glance what Amma needed. This had to end here. Where it started. Ryan's hand moved toward his jacket. Gun, knife, something, but Amma was faster. 3 weeks of Junho's self-defense training. 3 years of suppressed rage. 3 seconds of perfect clarity. She closed the distance and struck precisely where Junho had taught her, collapsing Ryan to his knees. The weapon clattered across tile. You don't own me, she said, standing over the man who'd stolen years of her life. You never did. Junho's men moved in as sirens wailed in the distance. Police already called, already given evidence of Ryan's stalking, his threats, his crimes. Amma walked away from platform 7 with her head high. Junho's hand in hers, finally free. The gallery opening happened on a spring evening when Seoul's cherry blossoms painted the streets in pink and white. Amma stood in the center of her own space. Not a university exhibition, not a borrowed room, but hers, watching people admire the installation she created in freedom instead of fear. The logistics company is official as of this morning, Junho said, handing her champagne. He wore a gray suit instead of his usual black, and something about the lighter color made him look younger, unburdened. Kong International Transport. Completely legal, mostly boring, and nowhere near as profitable as the old business. Do you miss it? Amma asked, watching him survey the crowd with the same tactical awareness, but without the edge of violence that used to follow him like a shadow. I miss the efficiency, the control. He smiled, and it reached his eyes for once. But I don't miss being my father. The council had fractured after Junho's departure, some going legitimate, others descending into chaos without his iron leadership. He'd kept a few loyal men, the ones willing to trade blood money for clean paychecks, and built something new from the ashes of his empire. Amma's mother and sister stood near her thesis piece, finally visiting Seoul without fear, without looking over their shoulders. Ryan Fletcher was serving 8 years for stalking, harassment, and attempted kidnapping. The trial had been brief, the evidence overwhelming. I keep thinking about that night on the platform, Amma said softly. When I ran toward you instead of away. Junho's arm slipped around her waist, the gesture familiar now, wanted. Best decision you ever made. Second best. She turned in his embrace, the gallery lights painting them both in warm gold. The best one was when I stopped running altogether. Outside, Seoul glittered in the darkness. But inside the gallery, surrounded by art born from survival and love built on choice, Amma Kana and Junho Kong finally existed in the light.